Hi, and welcome to Couch Conversations Beyond the Textbook, where real talk meets real life in the world of mental health. We're your hosts, Abby and Bethany, two therapists who have been through the textbooks and are entering the trenches. This is a space where we unpack what they didn't teach you in grad school, the messy, the meaningful, and the moments that shape us as professionals and people. So grab a seat on the couch and let's dive in. Please note that the content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the guidance of a qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding your mental health or medical condition. The views and opinions expressed by hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of any organizations or professionals they may be affiliated with. If you are in crisis, or if you think you may have a mental health emergency, please call 911 or contact a local mental health crisis line or emergency service in your area. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Couch Conversations Beyond the Textbook. I'm your co-host, Bethany.
Hi, everyone. I'm Abby.
And today we are going to be talking about post-grad requirements like licensure, the NCE, all of those things, looking for jobs, what that looks like, coming out of graduation, all of the things that we just went through as counselors ourselves. So it's pretty fresh on the mind for us, I think.
Some of us are still going through it.
Yes, true. So let's talk about it. Tell the people about after May 5th, I think was our graduation, right?
10th.
May 10th. Okay, May 10th.
Yes.
What has life looked like? Where are you at, licensure-wise, things like that?
So I took a little bit of a different route, and I didn't jump right into a career path. I have taken the last 3 months-ish, it'll be 3 months off, to just kind of have the summer with my kids, my one last summer hurrah. And so it's been really pretty low key on the therapy front. Very busy on the family front, but very low key. I have begun looking for jobs, and I've had some rejections. I've had some doors shut. I had a positive interview today, but it's been very kind of a new experience for me because prior to this journey, I worked at my kids' school. I've worked as a waitress, lots of jobs that were easy yeses. I've never done the career thing before. So it's been interesting.
So what has that been like for you to come out of grad school, take a little bit of a break, and then not have kind of what you were expecting happen and have some doors shut, like you said, and things like that?
It has been eye-opening. The break was great. I needed a little bit of a breather from, the 6.5 years of schoolwork straight. So the break was great. The getting back into it was difficult. I did have some leads to some jobs that I was very interested in, and for one reason or another, those doors were shut. And that was kind of hard for me because when I started this journey and this process into a career as a therapist, I was convinced that I was going to be a nonprofit employee. I have always felt very strongly that mental health care is too expensive. And so I thought the solution to that was for me to go the nonprofit route. And those were the doors that were shut. So I have ventured into the private practice world, and I have kind of opened my eyes to what that can look like. And I am learning that my perception is different than maybe reality. And and I've had some positive experiences to this point.
That's exciting. I mean, definitely some challenges, but exciting that you had a good interview and that things are moving along for you.
I hope.
They will, for sure.
Yes. So tell me a little bit about yours, because I know that you kind of went right into work.
Yes. So I stayed on at the private practice that I interned at. So it was pretty smooth transition. I took a week off in between graduation and working, which I would highly recommend to anyone who's looking at graduation. Give yourself a break. So I've been at that private practice working part-time, just 2 days a week. And it's been good so far. We're just going right into it. I got a week break, but it didn't really feel like much changed after that. Like I was working with a lot of the same clients and things like that. And then, of course, after you graduate, you're looking at all of the licensure things and making sure that you're covered on that end, and liability insurance, which you have to have in grad school, but then you have to buy it again once you graduate. And so there's all of the logistics behind starting a career in counseling. So for me, I didn't take the NCE until June so I graduated in May, didn't take the NCE until June, passed it, thankfully. I was nervous, but I passed it. And then it still took like 6 weeks after that to have my licensure be approved through the state of Indiana. So it's all just a very slow process. But during that time, at least in Indiana, it's different for every state. So if you're listening and you're out of state, please look into your own state's licensure laws. But for us in Indiana, I could work under a temporary license until all of that stuff came through. So that's been good. But now I'm officially an LMHCA in the state of Indiana, which is exciting.
That's very exciting. And explain a little bit about what the LMHCA is different than the LMHC.
Yes. So the LMHCA is a licensed mental health counselor associate. So after you graduate, and again, this is for the state of Indiana, but I think a lot of other states, well, it might be a different wording. They do something similar, but we are required to, so once you get your LMHCA, you're an associate license, you're still under supervision. So you need 100 hours of supervision and 3,000 hours total of indirect and direct work with clients. So that's what I'm doing right now under my associate license. So you're still under supervision, which has been nice. And then after that, you take another exam. After you get all of your hours, you take another exam, and then you can drop, if you pass that exam, you drop the A. So then you're an officially fully licensed LMHC.
Yes, and it's quite the process. It's very lengthy. It's very thorough. And I do know that there are some states that once you get your master's degree, you're just free to go. And I do know that there are some states that allow that. But particularly in Indiana, it is like getting a doctorate almost. Like you are still studying, and we're required to have so many continuing education hours and so much advocate work done. And so there are a lot of regulations.
Yeah.
To being a therapist.
Yeah, I think that's been the hardest. One of the hardest parts is just like, it almost feels like it never ends. Like, I'm like, okay, I graduated, and now I have to accumulate these 3,000 hours and supervision and then pass another test and all of the things. It's just like, to reach your end goal, there's a lot of steps to take, and it'll be worth it. And luckily, I mean, right now I'm still working with clients and I'm doing what I love. So that makes it easier. But it's definitely a process. I think it's a good process to have in place because we want good counselors that are well trained, but definitely a process that can be daunting.
For sure. I don't know about you, but when we were told about the NCE, and that is this big national counselor exam that we had to take just in order to be able to practice therapy under someone else's supervision, I was incredibly overwhelmed and scared and intimidated by that. Tell me a little bit about your experience taking the NCE and how you felt about it beforehand, afterhand, and going into it.
I think there's always nerves when it goes to testing. At least for me, I do not like standardized tests. I've never been good at standardized tests. Like in high school, the SAT and the ACT were just not it for me. And so I think that there's always been just some anxiety and
Mm-hmm.
doubt in my head of the knowledge that I have when it comes to these tests. And so that was, and just the fact that it's like a deciding factor on if you can become licensed or not. Like, it's like you go through all of school and then it feels like everything's riding on this test, which you can retake if you fail it the first time, and there's no shame in that. So, yeah, just a lot of pressure to make sure that I'm crossing that box off, and yeah, like putting all this work in for it so that I can pass it and do this career that I want to do. So that's kind of how I was feeling leading up to the NCE. Definitely some nerves. I took it in person at a testing center. I know a lot of people who took it online. I personally feel like I would be a little anxious about that, like if my internet cut out or something, or like the proctor thinking that I'm looking at something that I'm not. I also didn't really have a space to do it where I felt like I wanted to take everything off the walls and put all my books away. And so I was just like, I'll just go in person and take it, which ended up being fine. But what was your experience like with the NCE?
So, like I said, I was pretty intimidated by the idea of the NCE. And leading up, they have some awesome resources to study for the NCE. It's known as the Purple Book for anyone that is going to be taking it and needs some uh, a resource. It's like a study guide. It's a really thick purple book, and it's called the Purple Book, and it's the NCE study guide. And then there's also an app that you can pay for on your phone that has practice quizzes and things that. So I really dove into those, and I really used probably the app more than the book to study. And I got to the point, I took it while we were still in school. So I took it in April. And I don't know if I would necessarily recommend that because it was right around the time that we had our final projects due and we had all of our graduation stuff going on, and there was just already all the stress on me. I'm the type of person who, once I have all of that going on in my head, I'm like, what's one more thing? So I just added it to my list of to-dos. And I got to the point about 2 weeks before the NCE, maybe a week before the NCE, where I was like, either I know it or I don't. And I had to stop myself from studying anymore. And so I went in to take it. I took it at home and I just prayed a lot before. So I felt at peace about it, took it. I ended up passing it. And so then it was done. But then it took me 2 months to collect all of the documentation you need to get your licensure. So you needed to have different forms filled out by your school. You needed to be fingerprinted. I needed my marriage license because my name was changed and all the stuff I had to upload. And so it took me a while for it all to get to where it needed to be. And then I had to contact the Indiana Licensing Bureau to tell them that I had sent everything before they granted me my license. And I now have my associate's license as well.
Yes, the licensing board, I've had to call them a couple times as well, just to
Yeah.
be like, hi, where are we at in this process? And
Mhm.
obviously, like you said, there's forms that the school has to send over, which I didn't realize the school was sending over themselves. Like, I thought the school would send it to us and then we'd send it over, but I was happy
Mhm.
to be not the middleman, so I was fine with that. Um, but yeah, definitely like the marriage certificate, like you said, things like that, that you're adding all this documentation and getting fingerprinted and all of that fun stuff as you're looking at licensure and what that looks like. There's definitely, it can feel overwhelming when you graduate to get all of that together.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason mine took so long is because I was overwhelmed. And if anyone knows people with ADHD, when you get overwhelmed, you just kind of don't do anything. You shut down and you just don't. And so that was part of my problem is there was just so much from so many different places. So the school sent over their forms like a month and a half before my test score was set, and that I'm in my head thinking they're not going to keep all this stuff just chilling on their computers. So I felt very overwhelmed, and so I do not recommend that. Be proactive.
Yes, definitely important to be proactive if you can. But that's also hard because a lot of it, like once you send things in, it's not necessarily in your control either. So trying to control what you can.
Bottom line, I think, is that the NCE is not, it's a big scary monster. It's not that bad. I don't know about all schools. I know our school makes you take the CPCE, which is the counselor prep. What is it? CP counselors preparators. I don't know.
Counselor preparation comprehensive examination.
Exam. Yes. So it's like the precursor to the NCE. And I told everybody, if you can pass that, then you can pass the NCE.
Yeah. Yeah, I was not super thrilled when I learned that we had to take that test during grad school because, like I said, I don't like standardized testing, but I ended up being thankful that we did because I did feel like it helped prepare me for the NCE and what that looked like. So I ended up being thankful. I was more just frustrated that we had to pay for it and the stress that caused and whatnot, but I think it ended up being a good thing that our program required us to take that exam before, because I think that it really helped me with the NCE at least.
I agree. And if we've said it once, we've said it a million times. Grace produces great counselors because they have very rigid standards. That being one of them.
So what would you say job hunting for you has looked like in this new stage, like knowing that you have the license, and does that give you more confidence?
So it did. It did. And then I got on like LinkedIn and Indeed and Monster Job and ZipRecruiter and all those, and I started looking for jobs, and it was hard to find a job that would accept the LMHCA. Because a lot, I mean, generally they want you to be individually um, licensed or independently licensed. And so what I found myself doing was kind of advocating for myself. And, if I sent in an application, I would also send in an email, kind of explaining my experience and what I'm looking for. And sometimes, you hear back positive, and sometimes you hear back, no, we really just need somebody independent. I think one of the things that I did was our school had an opening for a job that we wanted a master's in either social work or counseling, but they also wanted an Indiana state teaching license, which I didn't have. But the job was for an autism and behavioral specialist, which I was qualified for. And so what I ended up doing was sending out an email saying, hey, I have these qualifications and I'm willing to go get an emergent teaching license if that is a requirement. And I mean, unfortunately, they had already filled the position, but they responded positively and said, hey, that's a great idea. Thank you for emailing us. We would have appreciated that. And so there's just, when you get that and you look and you see all of these jobs that are available, but they specify independently licensed, advocate for yourself because you never know.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that I had a misconception about too until I was talking to you about it. I was like, everybody needs therapists. Like, it's going to be so easy to find a job. And there's definitely places that will take you. And it is true that there is a shortage. However, with the associate license, any place that hires you really has to offer supervision for you.
Right.
So that's probably the biggest holdup, I guess, in some different career or jobs that they're unable to do that. And then that would mean you would have to probably find your own supervisor and pay them to be your supervisor and sign off on your hours.
Yeah. I just think that there was some like things that I wasn't aware of that they don't teach you in school. Like as an LMHCA, you can't bill insurance under your associate license. So you have to bill under somebody who's already licensed. And you're going to find that, which would be your supervisor or, another therapist at your site. And you're going to be more apt to find that in a private practice than you are in a nonprofit. And that's what I kept running into is um, having people like social workers or people working at these nonprofits who were not licensed, so they couldn't provide my supervision, and we couldn't bill. And so that was the problem I was running into. And that's not something I knew. I had no idea that that's how that worked.
Yeah, that's not something that I would have thought of either, especially yeah, when I was looking for jobs or things like that, I wouldn't have thought about that at all, to be honest. So I think that that's helpful information for people listening, and even good questions to ask in job interviews of, do you have someone that can provide me
Right.
weekly supervision and so I can get these hours? And the catch, at least in Indiana, is that you only have, I think, 48 months from when you're licensed to accumulate all of those hours, the 3,000 hours, and then take the test and become fully licensed. So you're on a time restraint. It's not like you can sit
Mhm.
with an LMHCA license for 6 years or things like that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that I found to be very interesting is that, um, when you're out of school, you're paying for supervision, which is not something we had to experience beforehand either. And that came as a surprise to me was, that will add up quick. So if you're paying for a supervisor outside of where you're working, I don't remember if it was monthly or weekly, but it was a good amount. I want to say like 150, and I want to say monthly, but I'm not positive. Um, so the recommendation I would make is, find a place where the supervisor is in-house.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean you're not going to pay them, but it will come out of your salary or whatever it is that, your hourly pay.
Right. And I found that with private practices, or probably even community mental health. I haven't looked into community mental health as well, but I've heard that they're not hiring LMHCAs as often either. So that is the one benefit of a private practice, is that most of the time they will provide that supervision for you because they want you to work for them. So I think that that is helpful and encouraging. One thing that I can say about the looking ahead after graduation and all of the licensure and things that I've been even still now a little stressed about is getting that 3,000 hours and the 100 hours of supervision as I look ahead to having a baby here in the
Hmm.
coming weeks, any day now, really, and knowing that I'm going to be going on maternity leave and also working probably pretty part-time after the baby comes. And so for me, that's been one stressor of like, okay, I have to get these hours under a certain amount of time for the 48 months. And I think for anyone that's graduating or looking ahead and knowing that other life changes are coming, that can be something that
Right.
is stressful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point of a temporary license, I do believe if you need, you can only use a temporary license one time in Indiana, but I do believe that you can use it at any time in Indiana. So I think if you have an LMHCA and it runs out, you can then apply for the temporary license. I think.
Yeah, that would definitely be something to look into. I'm hoping I don't run into that. I'm hoping I can
Yeah.
get all of
No,
my
you got it.
hours. Yeah.
You
And
got it.
the nice part is that, unlike in grad school where we had to get a certain amount of hours direct and a certain amount of indirect hours, the 3,000 hours after graduation can be however many direct or indirect, as long as there's 3,000 and a
Right.
supervisor signs off on it,
Yeah.
which is
Yep.
nice.
That is nice. That is nice. Because you're going to find yourself spending a lot of time in indirect hours, whether you need to or not, but just researching, different therapies and different interventions and looking things up, all of that stuff counts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so talk a little bit about that. What can people count? What have you been told that people can count as indirect hours? Obviously, direct hours is working directly with a client.
Yeah. So our supervisor was always a big advocate of indirect hours and saying, record everything. So, reading books about therapy, this is what she would allow. Reading books about therapy counted as indirect hours. Trainings count as indirect hours. Um, Internet researches count as indirect hours. Notes that you're doing, indirect hours. Um, Conferences, indirect hours. So pretty much anything you're doing for your job would count as an
Mm-hmm.
indirect hour.
Yeah, one big thing too that I've found is listening to podcasts on my way to and from work. that would count as indirect hours, like
Yeah.
educational podcasts on counseling and things like that, and mental health and things like that. And for me, I drive 30 minutes to work and 30 minutes back. So it's like that's a whole indirect hour that I'm getting on top of my workday, which is kind of nice too.
Yeah.
So just some things for people to keep in mind as they're, because that 3,000 hours can feel overwhelming, especially if you're
Oh, for
not
sure.
wanting to work full time with clients after graduation.
Hmm.
So tell me a little bit about, because I've said that I probably won't be working full time. What is your plan? What would your goals be? Because people, it can be a very flexible career. So people
Yeah.
have completely different expectations, and there's nothing wrong with
Hmm.
either thing. But what would your, what would your ideal schedule be, I guess?
So I have always said I'm very open to either full-time or part-time. We're very blessed in that my husband has a great job, and so working part-time is an option for me. But I'm very open to whatever it is that works for the place I'm working. My only real big things are that I want to be able to go to all my kids' things. So I guess an ideal schedule for me would be like 4, a 9 to 4 Monday through Friday, or 9 to 5 Monday through Thursday, something like that, where I'm able to be available to my kids in the evening. Um, but I know that in my research and doing, job hunting, there are a lot of places that are hiring therapists that need weekends and nights, and there is a need for that. So it's out there for sure, but it's just not necessarily where I'm at right now.
Yeah, that is definitely something that is nice about being a counselor, is that especially at a private practice, you can typically make your own schedule and say like, I'm willing to have this many hours open, here's what I want to work, if I want to do these hours
Hmm.
virtually, in person, how I want to split that up. That is super convenient. But I will say that a lot of places, and for anyone listening, if you do not work into the evening, your schedule will be a little harder to fill up, because most clients are looking for evening appointments, which is kind of a bummer sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, that can make things really hard. Um, Kind of along the same lines, but off topic a little bit. There are like so many different populations of which have a need. Is there a specific population that you kind of feel like is your people, or
Good
one that isn't?
question. This is something that I was really happy that I was able to get experience with a lot of different populations in internship. So, because I was at the college and then also at the private practice, I was working with a whole age range from like 8 years old to 50 something, I think was my oldest
Hmm.
client or something like that. Um, which was super insightful for me to figure out who do I want to work with, what age groups. I had always kind of known that I did not want to work with young children. And I always felt bad about saying that, because I'm like, it sounds bad if I say I don't want to work with kids. But one thing, I'm not super creative. Like, I've noticed that a lot of the therapists that are working with children are very creative. They can come up with different fun interventions and things to do in session. And I've just never been gifted with that. And that's okay. But I realized I worked with some kids in internship, and I just realized, yeah, I was right about this. I wouldn't want to only work with kids. There's a beauty in working with kids because it breaks up the day for sure. Like, a session with a kiddo feels a lot different than a session with an adult. And so that's kind of nice, but I could not have a full caseload of just children. I think that would be very difficult for me. So, definitely love like teens, like 16 and above, I would say, or maybe 15, but that would be kind of where I've landed as of right now. What about you?
I'm the opposite. I'm in the minority of that. I love children. So when I went into this, I thought I would be a solely child therapist. Like that's what I thought I would be doing because I've always worked with kids in every job I've had. But then I did my internship at the college and I fell in love with the college age. And there's just something about having someone who is fresh and young, but like there because they want to be there, because they are starting this, their whole life is ahead of them and they want to start fresh. And there's something so refreshing about that and so motivating. Um, but I also just love, I could sit on the floor and play with kids all day. I just think it's so fun. Give me some Legos and me and this kid are going to talk it out. Like, it's just something that I've always just really loved. And there's just so much, there is a lot of heartache and pain in that, in seeing a kid who's got trauma and just going through it. Um, but there's also so much reward in knowing that you're making an impact so young in their lives that is probably going to stick with them forever.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do. I love working with kids. Getting my play therapy certification is something that I is a huge goal of mine in the future. Um, so yeah, I'm kind of in the minority of that. I've had so many people say I could never do that, but it's not something I want to do. Keep me away from the kids.
Yes, I have heard mixed things. I know a couple people who really enjoy working with kids and that's what they want to do. And then, like you said, there's a lot of people that are like, I could not do that. It definitely takes a special kind of person. I think that there's a lot of fear surrounding working with kids too, just because you're also working or not working with the parents, but you're dealing with the parents. I'm
Hmm.
sure any teachers can relate to this as well,
Yeah.
where there's like a lot of, I, even for myself, there's the tendency to be like, I don't really want to have to deal with parents. And
Yeah.
um, that there's a little bit of fear in that too of how does, maybe not fear, but navigating what confidentiality looks like with
Hmm.
kids, especially when you get to the teenagers, and navigating that can be really difficult with parents depending on the child's relationship to their parents and things like
Yeah.
that. That can be difficult for the therapist to navigate. And I think that that's one thing that has steered me away from working
Yeah.
with kiddos, at least in the beginning. Now I feel a little more comfortable after having conversations with parents, and I've been lucky enough to have parents that have been pretty, not, maybe not chill is the right word, but very open to the process and
Receptive. Yeah.
yeah, receptive of the confidentiality and
Right.
not trying to get all of the information from every session for their kids. But especially with
Yeah.
teens, I can see that being pretty difficult.
Yeah. And that's something that's still, because I have yet to work with kids, I mean, in this capacity. And that is something that's still kind of, there is some intimidation there, but I also am like, I'm also a very direct person who will say very directly the needs in a, in a way that I hopefully can be received well. But and I think it takes someone who can be direct with the parents and say, hey, if there's anything that you need to know, I will tell you. But if you want this therapy, if you want this to work, then there has to be trust between me and your child, and that can't come if I'm going to be telling you everything that we talk about. Um, and I think that that absolutely is going to be harder if it's a court ordered session and the parents are not on
Mm-hmm.
board. Uh, but again, it's just going to have to come with a very strict, like, I will tell you what you need to know and leave it as much to that as you can.
For sure. And as you get the experience, you start to come up with the language and
Hmm.
for how to address parents and kids, and letting the child know like this is what confidentiality looks like for you, and so that
Hmm.
they're aware and they're a part of the conversation. I always have that conversation with the parents and the child in the room together so that
Yes.
everyone's on the
Yeah.
same page and saying like this is how I run things, this is how, obviously the parents have access to their medical information, so
Yeah.
they could look through, like ask for the notes or things like
Yeah.
that, but I have not yet had a parent do that, so
Yeah.
hopefully that will
They
not
reserve the
happen.
right, but we ask that you consider that heavily before you ask for it. The
For sure,
repercussions
because
of what that could be. Yeah.
yeah, because like you said, if the child does not, or the minor does not trust us, we're not going to get anywhere. there
Exactly.
there won't we won't be able to do our job well.
Right.
So,
Right.
and with children and minors, there is a lot of rapport building at the beginning of sessions, which I think is a lot different than sessions with adults.
Oh, for sure. I tell everyone I'm just a big kid myself. So, and that's the best way to describe me. My kids relate to me because I act like them.
That's true. You you
Um,
just are a fun person. I think you relate to kids well.
yeah, I love kids. They hold so many emotions and they need help getting them organized.
Yeah, I think that it's just the whole therapeutic process is just a beautiful thing, whether it's with kids or with adults. And it's just really exciting after grad school to get started to be like,
Hmm.
yeah, I did this, I met all of the requirements, and now I'm working as an adult and a human and a
Yeah.
therapist. And I think there's something
Uh-huh.
super exciting about that as well, despite all of the requirements that come after.
I'm 45 and I feel like a therapist baby. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder when that feeling will end.
let's talk about that imposter syndrome again.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
don't know that it ever actually does end.
Yeah, I will say the requirement for the supervision after grad school is so important. I know we talk about supervision all the time, but even with things that this, working with clients post grad that I've walked through, supervision
Hmm.
has been so necessary for me because you get really good experience in grad school, but to be honest, your practice is probably not giving you clients that they know are high risk, or they just,
That you're
when you're
not
in
ready for.
internship, yeah, that you're not ready for. And so, but
Right.
then it's almost like when you graduate, they'll throw whoever on your caseload. So,
Yeah,
which is great experience, but definitely makes supervision all the more important.
absolutely. And I know we're going to talk about supervision fully in another episode in the future. But I do want to kind of reiterate that, supervision is on you and it's only going to be you're only going to get as much out of it as you put into it. Um, be vulnerable in your supervision. And I mean, yes, there's a lot to be said for the supervisor as well, but if you're willing to be vulnerable and you have a good supervisor, your supervision is going to benefit you greatly.
For sure. And just making sure that as you look ahead towards graduation, knowing that you probably will get people on your caseload that are completely new experiences, new populations that you're working with, that like I didn't see a couple until after I graduated from internship, and it was my first one. And um yeah, and it's just you'll get different populations even after, and
Hmm.
probably some more intense cases, and there's nothing wrong with that, but just being prepared for that after you graduate, because you're expected or able to handle those things a little more, even though during your internship you weren't put in those situations. After
Right.
graduation, it seems like there's just more trust that you'll be able to handle those things, and you will be able to, but
Absolutely.
make sure that you have, yeah, that you're open with your supervisor, and of course
And,
in
and you're always willing to learn, always willing to humble yourself to say, I don't know what I'm doing here. I
mm-hmm,
need some input.
yes, the research does not end with grad school.
No.
I've definitely learned that.
And that's a good thing because
Yeah,
there's
and
always more to learn.
for sure, and just building your counselor tool belt as well, of different interventions and different things that work for different people. One big thing right now I feel like is the DBT that
Hmm.
I'm learning more about, which has been super helpful because it's helpful with different populations, evidence-based practices with that. So always being willing to, yeah, expand your counselor tool belt, which will make you feel more comfortable as you continue working, and more confident in yourself because you have so much more knowledge.
Absolutely. And I feel like we could do so many, like we do another full episode or six on just interventions and the benefits of them and the ones we've seen work and the ones that we don't love. I mean, they're just, you could go on for days about them. But always having like a good 10 interventions at your ready that you're confident in and that you're confident will work well with different populations of clients. I think that's something else that gets overlooked a lot and not super talked about is, interventions. They expect you to know them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to just be interventions can be tricky at first when but you're practicing them, and then
Yes.
you'll get better with them, and you'll start to be like, okay, that worked and that did not, or phrasing it this way worked and phrasing it that way
Yep.
did not, and you just become more comfortable the more that you use them, but being intentional in doing that as well.
I'll never forget the first time I did guided imagery. And I recorded it and gave it to my supervisor to look over. And she said, you might want to lower your tone and talk a little bit slower. Because evidently I was still very loud and went way too fast. And I remember asking the client when we were done, how was that for you? And she's like, I didn't like it.
That's
now I know
fair.
why. Because I raced through it and I was basically yelling at you.
Yeah, no, they'll be honest. They'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
I had a client that I did progressive muscle relaxation. I was trying to I just like talked her through this whole thing, and she was just like, that was weird. Okay. I thought it might be helpful, but I guess not.
I love it. And when you know the client pretty well, you can just laugh and be like, okay, so we're not doing that one again.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, okay, so that, like, she was like, yeah, she's like, it feels weird to close my eyes in here, and like, I was like, okay, that's fine. That's good to know.
The stories we could tell.
I know, but yeah, post-grad is a whole new world, and it's all exciting, and yeah, there's a lot to it though. So I'm glad that we have the space here to talk about it and normalize that experience, because I felt very overwhelmed, and I still do feel overwhelmed with post-grad and the requirements and the NCE and licensure and all of those things. And so I think normalizing it here, that it's just overwhelming, and that's okay. That's normal. But
you're going to survive.
You will. And you're equipped for it. And yeah, find people who you can relate to as well that will be like, oh, this is like, I mean, I feel like I texted you and other people in our program that I knew lived in Indiana that I was like, what are you doing for this? Or have you done this? Or did you contact this person? Or I don't know, how does this work? And so finding people that you know are going through it too, that you can rely on as well.
Yep, I agree with that.
But I think that's all we have for you guys today. So thanks for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to like and follow and subscribe and share it with someone else you think can relate.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Thanks for hanging out with us on Couch Conversations Beyond the Textbook. If today's episode resonated with you, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone you think can relate. Keep showing up, keep learning, and remember, the best growth doesn't always come from a textbook. See you next time.